Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Paige, and today I want to tell you the other books that were favorites of mine in 2021 that did not make it on my top 25 list. These are just like the honorable mentions or just my other favorites, because I mean, let's be honest, limiting your selection is really hard, and I just cannot forget these books. And so these are like my honorable mentions. These are standalones, and so yeah, let's go ahead and get started and talk about them. The first one is From the Embers by Martinez. I absolutely adored this one. I read it as soon as it came out in 2021. This is about a guy and a girl. They are both married, so they're both in, already committed relationships. They both have children, and they're going on this double date, and they're actually, they live next door to each other. And so they're leaving like all of their kids at one house with a babysitter, and then they're going to the other house for their double date. Something tragic happens to where the house is blown up, and only 2 of the people from out of the 4 survive. And they are the man and the woman from each relationship, but they're not married, so they are dealing with so much grief from both losing their spouses, and they are now both single parents, and they have their children and their jobs, and they're trying to just help each other even in like the most horrible time of their lives, and they really band together to help each other. And of course, a relationship forms along the way. This has a lot of grief and loss in this book, but it is so good. The next one is Lotus by Jennifer Hartmann. I read this one after I read Still Beating, because some of her books kind of take place in the same world, even though they're not technically a series. So this one deals with the guy that you briefly see in Still Beating that had been kidnapped when he was a little boy. And so he's been in captivity for so long now, and then he finally was, got away, and now he's just like walking into this whole brand new world. He doesn't know about anything. Of course, he's like one of like a virgin hero that is just very, has to learn everything. He moves back in with his stepbrother, and his neighbor that he was friends with when they were little before he was kidnapped still lives next door, and she remembers him, and they befriend each other again, and this was their romance, and it was so good. The next one is Tryst, 6 Venom by Penelope Douglas, and let me tell you, this book had conflicting feelings about. I almost DNF'd it. So you're thinking, how did this end up on your favorites list? But just hear me out. The bad part of this book that I didn't like was the bullying. I can read bullying, but it's just not my cup of tea. This is a sapphic new adult romance. The 2 girls basically come from different worlds, and I'm so sorry if you can hear people working. They're remodeling the house next door, so it's constant hammers and working on the house all the time. But the 2 girls, one comes from like the high up end, side of town, and the one comes from the lower end. She has a group of brothers. Their parents have died, I think, and she's been raised by her brothers, and they her brothers kind of are a gang themselves, which will be very interesting to see if Penelope Douglas does anything with their story. But anyway, back to this book. They go to the same school, and they are on, I think, the same soccer team at school, and they hate each other. They absolutely hate each other. The girl from the lower side with her brothers, she knows she's gay, and she's openly gay. The other one doesn't know this about herself, and so it's, kind of revealed to herself throughout the book. And then, of course, this is going to be their romance, so it does end up being a happily ever after. The more towards the middle to the end was my favorite part, was because when they stopped bullying each other and realized that they were infatuated with each other instead, because sometimes love and hate can be very similar emotions, and when they realized that, you know, they really liked each other and they gave the relationship a go, then it was so good. I could have just left out the bullying part and just focused on their romance, because that is what made this a 5-star versus a DNF. The next one is A Lady of Rooksgrave Manor by Kathryn Moon. I had seen this a lot and I finally picked it up, and I'm glad I did. This is about a girl who this is like an alternative type of world, and she has been like this maid and servant, and she has to move on from the place where she's at. So they place her in this home where essentially you're a escort for these supernatural beings, these monsters, and that is what she is, and she really enjoys that. She really embraces that side of herself, and she becomes an escort to these monsters, and of course, which eventually leads into kind of like a reverse harem type of situation, because there's more than one and they end up becoming her partners. And it was so good. It was such a great book. I can't wait for the second one in the series. And then I read In Harmony by Emma Scott. This was such a good book. Of course, we know Emma Scott is very emotional. She has, every book deals with some kind of heavy emotion. But this girl is being she was sexually assaulted before where they used to live in New York. And they moved to this place because her dad had to move for work. Then she meets the hero of the story, who goes to the same school. He is trying to just make it through school to graduate so he can search for big and better things. He is physically abused by his dad. They're very poor. He struggles a lot, and they meet, and of course her dad forbids her to see him, but they do see each other because he is an actor. They put on, like, the town community puts on these plays, and so he's always acts in each one, and she joins the theater too. And then that's how they explore, you know, a relationship between themselves. Of course, there's a lot of heavy emotional things that, you know, they're both dealing with, and but it was such a great book. She finds this community where she feels safe and loved, and she doesn't want to leave, versus to where he has always wanted to leave. The next one is also another Emma Scott book. This is Forever Right Now. This is about a girl who has been a drug addict in the past, and we actually see another character from one of the other books from Someday Someday. And I love that about Emma Scott's books, is that you see characters pop up from her other stories. So it's like, you know, her world kind of collides in these stories. But this is about a girl who moves to a new place just to get a fresh start, and she moves in this house that has, you know, basically like made separate apartments in this huge place, and she meets a single dad and she helps him with his daughter on days, you know, that he needs help, because he is fighting for custody, but he doesn't know her past, and that she has, you know, been an addict in the past, which could hinder his, you know, case for custody. And this is also their romance, and it was so good, so emotional, but I loved it. The next one is The Butterfly Project by Emma Scott. This revolves around a girl who writes comics. She draws, you know, she writes her comic books, and she is meeting with this prospective company to, you know, publish her comic books, and she is denied they really like it. They just said there's something missing, and so she wants to stick around and try to figure that out before she just completely gives up her idea. She meets this guy at a restaurant, and they decide to be roommates. He has previously been in prison, so he has a heavy past that, you know, he really wants to keep her from, but this is their romance, and it was so good. The next one is one I put off from reading for a long time, but I finally picked it up, and I'm glad that I did, because I did fall in love with it. This is The House in the Cerleaun Sea by TJ Klune. This is about a guy who is a social worker for these like children that have superpowers, more or less. They're like supernatural children, and he has to go to these orphanages where they are kept to make sure, you know, everything is how it should be, that they're being well taken care of. And he goes to this island, to this orphanage, where like the most dangerous supernatural children are held. And this is very light on the romance, so if you're expecting romance, this is why I put off reading it for so long, because I love romance. So this is very light on it, but it does make up, the children make up for it, the atmosphere and each one of their personalities, and he's so ingrained in what he thinks and what he knows, but these children and their caretaker kind of opens him up to a world and you know, gets him thinking in ways that he's never thought about before. And it was truly a delightful book. I really enjoyed reading it. The next one is The Wreckage of Us by Brittainy C. Cherry. This was such a good one too. Of course, I love all of her books. This is about a girl who is living in just a bad place. Her mother is addicted to drugs. Her stepfather is a drug dealer who keeps her on the drugs, and they throw her out. She ends up living in a shed on some property, and they discover that she's there, and they offer her a job. And so she's working on this ranch, and she meets the ranch owner's grandson, and they do not hit it off well at first, but he comes to, you know, kind of know her and understand like what she's been through and how hard of a worker she is and how determined she is to make a better life for herself. And he is an aspiring musician. He goes off to become, you know, like a famous, him and his friends are in a band, and they have to have like a long distance relationship, and she's also raising a child too. So there's a lot of different components in this story, but it is so good. The next one is Vibe by Liza James. This is a sapphic romance, and this is about a girl who comes to this strip club with her boyfriend and her best friend, and she is just kind of, this is like not her typical atmosphere. She has a very heavily like abusive past. She comes essentially from this cult, and they abused her for many years until she escaped. And then they're watching the dancer dance on stage, and when their eyes meet, there's just a connection between them. There's a chemistry there, and she leaves, you know, with her boyfriend and goes back home, and they do meet up again. And the dancer that she met at the club knows that her boyfriend is just a slimy douchebag and is trying to get her away from him. And then there's a lot of secrets that are revealed. There's a lot that happens in this book, but this is the romance between her and the dancer, and it is so freaking good. The next one is actually a Christmas story, but I could not help put it down because it was so good. This is The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Liese, and I'm so sorry if you can hear a dinging sound on my phone because my husband keeps texting me and it's driving me crazy. But anyway, he's at work and I could tell he's on a break. But anyway, back to the book. The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Liese was so good. So good. This is a hate to lovers. Well, actually like hate to friends to lovers. This girl and this guy are working at this bookstore, and they just do not get along. He's like a stick in the mud compared to her. Just, you know, joyful attitude. She is very like happy-go-lucky type of character, just really sunshine, whereas he's more grumpy, and they just don't mesh well until, you know, they kind of discover, you know, like the feelings that they have underneath it all, even though he's very attentive to her. And she goes to, you know, she has this horrible boyfriend at one point, and he's just kind of shows like what kind of man he is, because he has noticed all these little things about her without even kind of knowing, because she does have autism that he doesn't know, but he can kind of pick up on things like things she likes and dislikes, and he's so attentive to her, which is something that I love. I love when the hero is very attentive to her needs, what she likes, what she dislikes. And anyway, this was their romance and I freaking adored it. The next one is Unhinged by Onley James. I love this one. This is a serial killer romance, and so far I know that I'm recording this in the the new year, but I've like read everything that she's written so far, and I'm waiting for the next book to be released soon. But anyway, back to the first book, Unhinged. This is about a guy, Adam, who is one of like 7 brothers. Their father has adopted them all, and because they have like psychopath tendencies, they are psychopaths. And he adopts them as like an experiment, but as a father, not as just like, he wanted it to be more loving and more of a father-son relationship instead of, an experimental relationship. But he raised them all to be successful men, but also killers behind the scenes, but doing it for like justice, like kind of feeding that psychopath tendencies that they have, that killer, and making them killers for taking out bad guys and all that. And this series is delightful. This is his romance. I think they're all romances. They're so freaking good. I love this series. I'm so obsessed. The next one is Love Her or Lose Her by Tessa Bailey. Oh, I love this one so much. This is a couple that's already married. This is kind of a marriage in trouble romance. They are on the brink of divorce. She's living with her friend. They're separated and he is devastated by it. They have a lot of miscommunication with each other, and they start to go to marriage counseling. And I love this story. I love a marriage in trouble romance, and this one was just really top tier. The next one is Manhattan by Kandi Steiner. I had read the first 2 books in her series, the Becker Brothers series, before, but I just kind of put it down and I read the next 2 in the series. But Manhattan was definitely my favorite of 2021 because this revolves around the youngest brother in that family. He has, he's pretty much left with a broken heart after his girlfriend dumped him to go on to Nashville to try to become a music star. And he is just kind of left picking up the pieces of his heart. He's determined that he's going to leave to go to New York to get out of their small town and get away from it all. And while his best friend is on the side, she's been secretly in love with him pretty much ever since they met back in when they were children. And she comes up with a plan of trying to take him like to all their favorite places and do a lot of fun things around where they live to try to entice him to stay, to remember why he does love where he lives. And they fall in love in the process, and he kind of realizes, his eyes are kind of open to who she is. He's always just kind of seen her as his friend, as one of the guys, but he really opens his eyes to her and realizes what has been in front of him the whole entire time. The next one is My Vows Are Sealed by Carmen Richter. I read this one and I do want to continue on with the series. This is a girl who was raised in church by her very strict parents. Her dad is very abusive to her, and she has been dealing with this going on for a long time. There is this boy in her church kids group, and he kind of notices what's going on, and so he tries to protect her, and this is their romance. And it deals with a lot of heavy topics, but was really worth the read. It just hits you so hard sometimes. And especially if you have like a religious past, a religious upbringing, I know I really connected with it. But even though this book deals with a lot of heavy topics, their romance is absolutely delightful, and I loved it. The next one is Lingus by Mariana Zapata. This is actually one of her lighter, more insta-lovey. And you have to really take that word with a grain of salt with Mariana Zapata, because all of her books are slow burn, so this book felt way more fast-paced than her other books. But that is something that I love about her books. But this is about a porn star, and he meets this girl at a porn, like a porn convention. she doesn't realize that he is a porn star. He doesn't want to reveal that to her yet, but they just have such a great connection, a great time. And they meet back up later and they form this very, very sweet friendship. They kind of adopt a dog together, hence the name Lingus, because that's the dog's name. And he's also becomes ill at one point where she takes care of him, which is very sweet. And then a romance blossoms between them and they're having to try to figure it out, you know, since he's a porn star and all. So very, very good. I'm so glad that I read this one by Mariana Zapata. The next one is Heart Bones by Colleen Hoover. This is about a girl who her mother passes away and she moves in with her father, who she hasn't seen in such a long time. She moves in with him and her stepmother and her stepsister and tries, you know, to begin this life. She meets this boy who lives around the area, him and his friends, and he doesn't lie to her, kind of lies by omission. He doesn't really tell her the full truth about himself, and it's not kind of really revealed until more towards the end, where there's a lot more behind the scenes that she did not know, but she fights for him, and it was really an incredible story. The next one is Dead Men Walking by Giana Darling. I read this one in 2021. Of course, you know that I love the Fallen Men series by Giana Darling, and whenever one is released, I always have to pick it up and read it. This revolves around the guy in the motorcycle club. His name is Tryst. He's very kind of has psychopath tendencies. He is just very aloof, very different from everybody else. And he's like the club's like enforcer. And he is really drawn to Bea, who is from the second book. And she is with Zeus, the president, and this is her little sister, and he's just very drawn to her little sister, and this is their romance. This is not like one of my favorites of the series, but it is still really good. I love each of the books in that series, and I'm always just hanging on the edge of my seat for the next release. The next one is Love in the Wild by Emma Castle. This is a Tarzan retelling. This plane crashes in the jungle. This little boy is adopted by these gorillas because his parents die in the crash. And he is raised by these gorillas. And this girl comes into the jungle. I think she's like researching something. I don't remember the exact why she's there. But she comes in contact with this guy. And it is such a fun read. It's just something that, you know, is so unique. Of course, it had all the Tarzan and Jane vibes to it, and they fall in love. And, you know, of course, they take him back to, you know, the society, to, you know, the real world, and he has to like learn everything. So it was really a fascinating read. And the last one that I'm going to mention is Culty by Mariana Zapata. I don't know why that I did not put this one on my top 25. This really was a top contender, but this is about a girl who is a soccer player, and there is a new coach for the team, and he's kind of like an assistant coach. And because he used to be a, you know, famous soccer player, he's like one of the best in the world, someone that she had a crush on growing up, until she realizes how horrible he is. How he is just has a really bad attitude. He is just very standoffish. He's very aloof and very cold, and totally not the kind of person she thought he was, until she gets to know him better and kind of sees what makes him tick. And this is their romance, and it was perfection. So those are all of my top favorite standalone honorable mentions. Let me know if you've read any of these or what you think about them, or books that you read in 2021 that you really liked. I hope you guys have a great day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.